Welcome back, everyone. So now that we've typed out our search box, let's type out our app.js. Our app.js contains the bulk of our logic and code, so this is probably going to require a lot of typing because we have so many things defined. The first step is always to rename this from JS to TS. Whatever it is before, name it to the new one. Now here, one thing I want to mention is that this is indeed JSX, so we can even update this to TSX to be more explicit. The reason it works even with .js is because under the hood, React app has set up Babel so that even if it's JS, it will attempt to use JSX if it needs to, if it realizes that you're trying to return JSX elements. That's just one of the advantages of using create React app so that our code gets registered even if we're not using the correct file function type. So inside, one thing I want you to notice right out the gate. We do see that there are a bunch of highlights about where our errors are. There's going to be a process, oftentimes when migrating an application, where the moment you switch your files over to Typescript, you will see a bunch of errors. This is actually a good thing because through these errors, you're able to now figure out what you need to type in order for your code to work. So first things first, there's a couple things we need to think about. Chances are, the most critical part of our application that needs to be typed is going to be the data that we receive. The data that we receive is from this fetch. But the thing about this fetch is that we don't actually know what it is that we're getting back from this fetch. We know the shape of the object if we literally go to this URL and we check it out. So if we come here and paste it in, we do see that this will be the shape. But the problem is that we're not getting this from the actual API that we're calling. There's no third-party library that's giving us this type. If we were to type this ourselves, now we're creating a connection between our application and this website. They might update these values. We would have no idea. And if our application is in production, we're suddenly going to break. So what we want to do is figure out a way to defend ourselves from these changes as best as we can. What you want to do here is you do want to type this up somehow. Instead of just assuming we're going to get anything, we are doing some type of, say, transformation in order for us to actually be able to ensure that we have the correct values, at least if they're there. For us, for example, we mainly know that we're only using name. And if I remember correctly, we're just using email and the ID. Those are the only three variables that we need from this object that we're getting back. In order for us to type this fetch, the easiest way is to actually create a utility function. So as we know, we want to make a utils folder following our best practices. And inside of here, we can create a new file and we can call it fetch.utils.js or data because we're getting data. And here, actually, let's make this a TS file because we know we want to use TypeScript from now on. Here, what we're going to say is that I want to create some kind of generic getter function. So this is some getData function. What it does is that it is an async function. So I'm going to define just the function first before we actually start typing this. And what it will do is it's going to get some response back. This response is going to come from us calling fetch on some URL value. So we can say path or we can say URL. What we do then is we return this response, but we convert it to JSON because when we get it back, it's not going to be in the JSON format and we want to have it in the JSON format. This means that this function that we export out of here is going to receive some type of string as the URL. So if we were to type this, but what does this function actually return? This is where we need to explicitly tell what we're returning back. So earlier we saw what a function definition looks like if we were to define the function type. But here, what you can do as well, when you write out a function like this, you don't actually need to put the fat arrow. You can just say, okay, in the parameters, I'm going to directly define the types. And then in order for me to tell what gets returned back from this function, what type is getting returned, you can put colon here. And then here, you just put the return type. What we're returning back is going to be an await. If you return an await, you're actually returning back a promise. And a promise, just like we saw before with our change event, receives a parameter because it needs to know what's the type that you're going to give me that I'm going to return as the actual resolved value from this promise. This is where you can use a generic because it can be anything. We don't know what we're getting back. This response value does not have a type. We don't know at this point. But what we do know is that probably when we call getData, we ourselves are probably going to know what URL we're passing to it. So in turn, we probably have an idea as the coder what the actual type that this URL is getting back is going to be. Because this is a generic function. It can call fetch on Google API. It can call fetch on the actual JSON placeholder. It can call it on an Amazon link. We don't know what we're calling fetch from inside of the function. The function itself has no idea. So as a result, we need to define to it what this will be. But when we call the getData, because we are passing in the URL, we know very likely what we're going to get back. So as a result, this is where we have to actually say, hey, I know what this promise is going to be. Let me tell you. And the way you do that is you use a generic. And as I mentioned with a generic, it's essentially a type parameter that can be used throughout the rest of this function inside of its definitions for types. So what we're going to say is that I'm going to pass you some parameter t. T typically is the starting type. So it's like T, S, R, etc. Those are the parameter names that are most frequently used. So here we're going to say, okay, let me give you some type T. And this is what you're going to pass into the promise. So doing this now, we're essentially saying, okay, getData is going to receive some type T. This type T is what you're going to return from this function inside of a promise. And now if we were to use this, remember we need to pass it some type T. We first need to import in the actual getData from our utils folder, data utils. And then what we can do is actually call getData and get the appropriate value. So inside of useEffect, instead of using fetch like this, what we're going to do is we are going to now create a new async function called fetchUsers, which is going to be, again, an asynchronous function that will actually retrieve these users and then set it inside of the monsters array. So let's talk about how to do that. So first we know that we get back the users from us calling our getData. We're calling getData with this URL. But here we need to define what the actual type that we're getting is going to be. Because right now, users, we don't actually know, which is why we're saying it's unknown. It's an unknown type. We don't know what the type that we're going to get is. We haven't defined it yet. We have to pass it in, as I mentioned, as a generic. What we know is that we have, again, those three values we want. So we can say this type is going to be of type monster. This monster has an ID, which is a string. It has a name, which is a string, and it has an email, which is a string. And we know this because we were earlier referencing the actual values inside of the website itself when we were looking at the fetch and we were looking at the JSON object. So here with this type monster, we know that we're getting it back as an array. So what we can say is that let me pass to you what this generic is going to be. It's going to be a monster, but it's in an array. So the way that you can define array is you can put these square brackets after the type, or you can say array like this. And this also works. This also defines an interface of type array. So again, if you look at this, you see interface array with the T being the generic. Monster is what it contains. So it's an array of monsters. But this is long and lengthy. I prefer using just this square bracket definition. And now we also know this is an array of monsters. So now what's going to happen is that if you hover over get data, you'll notice that it has our type definition. We are saying that this is a get data where we receive the monster array as the generic. Then what it returns back is a promise of the monster array. Notice how it took the generic and it passed it into the promise as the value. This is how you can use these generics, and now we know for sure that users is a monsters array. Because using type inference, TSX is able to know, oh, if I await this get data, I'm going to definitely get back a promise with a resolve value of a monsters array. Await is going to resolve that value, cast it to the users, so of course you're going to get an array of monsters. And now users is explicitly typed to a monsters array, which is what it's expecting. And just like that now, we have type safety. Now moving forward, what we also need to do is we need to set inside of our use state this monsters array. But this is not typed either. So what we're going to do in the next video is we type out what this will be. So join me in the next video and let's type out use state.